There was a red banner slapped diagonally across a photograph of my own front porch when I opened Facebook that morning, and the banner said Solge. It was the lake house, the one my husband Theo built board by board on Loon Lake. I had not listed it, I had not signed a single page, and not one person in my family had thought to tell me before a stranger's marketing post did. I'm Iris Vandermeer. I'm 70 years old, and for 37 years I was a title and escrow officer, which is a long, dull way of saying I spent my whole working life reading exactly who owns a piece of property and who only believes they do. I'm going to tell you what I did about that red banner. It was quiet. It was finished before any of them understood it had started. And the worst thing in this story is not that my daughter tried to sell my house out from under me. It's the $31,000 she'd already taken in earnest money, what the buyers were planning to do to the house Theo built, and the one page in this whole family that nobody ever bothered to read. Stay with me. Welcome back to Decades of Patience, where the woman they decide is too old to keep up turns out to be the only one holding the document that decides everything. If anyone has ever looked at a thing your whole life was poured into and called it just sitting there, then this one is for you. Subscribe because the card in this story lands once. It lands on a recorded page, and there is no taking it back. I did not call my daughter. I want you to notice that because it matters at the end. A frightened woman calls. A furious one calls louder. I set the phone face down on the counter. I poured my coffee, and I made myself do the thing 37 years had trained into me before any feeling could get its hands on the wheel. I read the file before I decided how to feel about it. So I clicked the post. It was a real listing on a real brokerage page, and it had been live, I realized, for 11 days. 11 days my lake house had been for sale to the entire internet while I drove past the turnoff twice a week on my way to the cemetery. The agent's name sat in a little circular photo. Whitney Dolan, my son-in-law's younger sister. 8 months licensed, I'd learn, this her third listing ever. The headline read Lakefront Legacy on coveted Loon Lake. The price read $599,000. And the banner, that bright, cruel banner, read Solge. Over asking, the caption bragged, $620,000. Then I read the description, and that is where the morning stopped being about money. Lovingly maintained 4-bedroom on 112 feet of private frontage. Original cedar and stone construction, lots of character. Being sold as, bring your vision and your builder. Tear down and build your dream, or restore. Rare chance to own the lot. Bring your builder. Tear down the lot. Theo poured the footings for that house in the summer of 1979, and we slept in a tent on the slab while he framed it, and he set the last cedar shake the week. Our daughter, Paige, was born in 1981. He died in the front room in 2015. With the lake going gold outside the window, he'd cut himself so the morning light would land on my side of the bed. And a 26-year-old agent had reduced all of that to the lot, and a stranger from the city was planning to put a bulldozer through the wall my husband built around the rest of my life. That was the worst part, not the theft, the bulldozer. Hold on to it. It's the reason I did what I did the way I did it. I closed the laptop. My hands were steady. I have signed my name on the last page of more than 10,000 real estate transactions, and I have learned that the steady hand is the one that gets to keep the house. So, I made a second cup of coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and asked myself the only question that ever matters in my old line of work. Who do they think owns it? Because somebody had to be the seller of record. Somebody had signed a listing agreement. Somebody had accepted $31,000 and represented, in writing, that they had the right to convey 112 feet of Loon Lake frontage to another human being, and I had not. So either my name had been forged, which I doubted, because my family didn't think they needed to forge anything, or my daughter and her husband had simply decided the lake house was theirs to sell, and found a piece of paper they believed let them do it. I knew which one before I finished the thought, Because there was a piece of paper. I'd signed it myself in 2016, the year after Theo died, when Paige slid it across this same table and said, "Mom, it's just so I can help if something happens to you. Pay a bill if you're in the hospital. Everybody does it. A durable power of attorney. I'll tell you later why I signed it, because the reason is part of the card. For now, understand only this. My daughter held a power of attorney over my affairs, and she had decided. In the careless way people decide convenient things, that authority over her mother meant authority over everything her mother touched, including a house she was certain her mother owned. She was wrong about who owned it. She was wrong in a way that is a public record. She was wrong in a way that cost $5.20 to check, at the county where I worked for 37 years, and she never once checked it, because she already knew. She knew the way people know things they've never looked at, by feeling, and the feeling was wrong. Let me show you the week. Because the week is where they handed me the whole plan, one comfortable piece at a time, while every one of them was certain I was too old and too sad to notice. I drove up to the lake. It's 40 minutes from town to the turnoff, and I drove it the way you drive toward a thing you already know is going to hurt. Slow, both hands. I came around the last bend under the white pines Theo and I planted as seedlings, and there was a gray realtor's lockbox clamped to the boathouse door, the kind any stranger with a code can open to let themselves into your life. On the boathouse where Theo's unfinished canoe still hangs in the rafters with one rib unset, because I could never bring myself to take it down. Somebody had decided that building was inventory now. There was a car in my own driveway. A young woman in a blazer stood on my dock with two strangers in the expensive outdoor clothes city people buy to go to the country in, sweeping her arm across my lake like a game show hostess. An open house. On a Tuesday, they hadn't expected anyone to come, least of all the dead man's widow, who was supposed to be home in town, declining. I parked. I did not hurry. An old woman crossing her own grass toward her own dock is the least alarming thing in the world, and I have learned to use exactly how unalarming I am. "Hello," I said pleasantly. "I'm Iris. This is my house." You should have seen the agent's face. Whitney Dolan went the gray of a young person discovering the floor of her career has a hole in it. "Mrs. Vandermeer," she said, "Paige told me the property was vacant, that you'd moved into town and the family was handling the sale. The property. Vacant. The family. Handling it. 4 phrases doing an enormous amount of quiet work. Did she? I said. Not a question. I turned to the buyers who were beginning to feel a deal develop a crack. And you must be the folks buying my lake. We, yes, the man said. The Ostranders. We're so sorry. We understood. He stopped. A decent man, caught in something he hadn't built. There's no problem, is there? That depends on a document none of us is holding, I said. But don't let me spoil your afternoon. He built it well. Whoever ends up with it is getting better bones than they'll find new. And I smiled. And I walked past all 3 of them to the end of the dock, where Theo taught 2 children and 4 grandchildren to cast a line, and I let them finish their tour behind me. Because I didn't need a confrontation that afternoon. I needed confirmation. And I had it. They thought the house was vacant. They thought the family was handling it. They were going to closing, which meant the first time anyone in that whole transaction actually looked at who owned the property would be the day the title company ran the search. Far too late for them. Exactly on time for me. My neighbor told me the rest. Hank Dubois has had the cottage on the north side of my line for 30 years, and he's the witness in this story. So, remember him. A retired county surveyor. A man who has spent his whole life knowing precisely where one person's property ends and another's begins, and who does not say a thing he can't stand behind. He came down the shoreline path and stood beside me as the Ostranders' brake lights went up the lane. I figured you knew, Iris, he said. They've had people through here 2 weeks. That couple had a fella out last Saturday. Architect, I think. walking the lot with a roll of plans. I heard the wife say they'd push the whole thing back from the water and go up 2 stories. He looked at the house Theo built. Push the whole thing back. I didn't like the sound of it. No, I said. I don't imagine you did. Hank, do me one kindness. Don't tell Paige you talked to me. Don't tell anyone I was up here. He studied me the way a surveyor studies a corner pin that doesn't sit where the old map says. You've got something, he said, don't you? I've got the only thing that's ever mattered out here, I said. And they haven't gone to look for it. I'd like to keep it that way a little longer. Now the small slice of history you need, and not 1 sentence more, because the history is the card, and I've been promising you the card. Theo and I bought the Loon Lake lot in 1979 with everything we had. And he built the house with his own hands across 3 summers because we couldn't afford to pay anyone. That's the plain reason it isn't a house to me. It's a record of his hands. Every door he hung still sits a little proud on the latch side, because that's how he hung doors. I spent my career reading other men's deeds across a desk. He spent his summers making the one thing we owned that the desk could never quite hold. In the spring of 2008, Theo was diagnosed the first time. He beat it that round. They gave him 7 more years before it came back for good. But a diagnosis makes you look honestly at the future. And I had spent 25 years by then watching families lose the cabin, the farm, the home, at the worst moment of their lives, because a beloved place, sitting loosely in a sick person's name, is a place that can be reached by a nursing home lien, by Medicaid estate recovery, by a creditor, by a grown child with a power of attorney and good intentions and a bad idea. I had closed those files. I had watched people sign away the place where they learned to swim because nobody set it beyond reach while there was still time. I was not going to let that happen to Loon Lake. So in the autumn of 2008, Theo and I sat down with a lawyer named Frances Okonkwo. Remember her? She's still practicing, and she's the reason this story has the ending it has, and we did the careful thing, the long way around. We created an irrevocable trust, the Vandermeer Family Trust, executed and recorded in the county where I happened to work on the 14th of November, 2008. I'll tell you what it says in a moment. For now, hold 3 facts. We deeded the lake house out of our names and into the trust. From that November, neither Theo nor I personally owned it. The trust did. I was named sole trustee, not Theo, not Paige, not a bank. Me alone, with exclusive authority to hold, occupy, and decide the fate of the property. And I was named sole lifetime beneficiary, with the exclusive right to use and possess it for the rest of my life. Our children, Paige, and her brother Daniel out in Oregon, who wants no part of this, were named remainder beneficiaries only, which is a precise legal term meaning a very simple thing. They get nothing and can do nothing until I am gone. They cannot list it. They cannot sell it. They cannot put a lockbox on the boathouse. And no power of attorney over me as a person reaches 1 inch of it, because I don't hold it as a person. I hold it as trustee, and the 2 are different people in the eyes of the law. One of them had all the authority. My daughter had never once thought about her. That's the card. Paige didn't know it existed. Or rather, she half knew, the way you half know a thing your parents told you at a kitchen table when you were 27 and not listening, because it was about death and you had a date that night. We told both children in 2008. Daniel remembered. Paige did not. And after Theo died, the not remembering hardened into a different story. Mom rattling around a lake house she can't keep up. The place a family asset waiting for the family, the only question being when. She built an entire plan on a story. She never pulled the trust. It's recorded. Anyone can pull it for $5. She never did, because she already knew what she felt, and feelings do not get recorded at the county. Now let me show you what they thought of me. Because the gap between what they thought and what was true is the whole engine of this thing. Paige came to see me 4 days after the banner went up, with her husband Garrett and a grocery store coffee cake. which I've come to understand is what this kind of conversation tastes like in my family. And I want to be fair to her, because the easy version, the daughter as thief, is a lie, and I have no use for lies. Paige is not a thief. She's a frightened woman married to a man whose confidence runs a length ahead of his luck. Garrett's boat and marine dealership had been quietly drowning for 3 years, and somewhere in the strain of holding up a life that cost more than it earned, my daughter decided. The lake house was the answer, her grieving mother was the obstacle, and the kindest thing she could do was handle it without troubling me. She told herself it was love. It is remarkable what we'll call love, when the alternative is calling it what it is. "Mom," she said, her hand over mine, "we think it's time to do something smart with the lake place. You're up there all alone, it's so much house, the taxes are brutal, and honestly, you can't really keep it up anymore. It's just sitting there. We found a buyer, a lovely couple, offering way over what it's worth. You wouldn't have to lift a finger, and the money would set you up. Set all of us up." Daniel agrees. "He didn't," I called him. "It's the responsible thing. It's just sitting there. You can't keep it up anymore." There it was, the whole justification in 2 soft sentences. I'd cut my own firewood at that house in October. I'd reshingled the boathouse roof at 66 with Hank holding the ladder, but I let my hand tremble a little under hers, because the declining widow's hand trembles, and I'd decided 4 days earlier exactly which woman I'd be until the moment it no longer served me. Helpless, fading, grateful to be handled. Because a person who thinks she's been caught gets careful and hides the next folder. But a person certain you're harmless hands you the whole plan, page by page, and never notices you reading it. "That's a great deal of money," I said slowly, like a woman trying to keep up. "And you've already found the buyers." "It's basically done, Iris," Garrett said, leaning back, comfortable. "We just need you to come sign at the closing. It's a formality. The title company handles everything. And then it's off your plate, for good." A formality. The title company handles everything. I had been the title company that handles everything for 37 years. So I knew exactly what would happen at that formality. The title search would run. The examiner would pull the chain, find a deed recorded in November 2008 conveying the property into the trust, find the seller had no authority to convey, and stop the closing dead. The earnest money would be in dispute the same hour, and Whitney Dolan, 8 months licensed, would discover she had sold a property her seller didn't own, which her brokerage's insurer and the licensing board would both, in time, want a word about. None of them knew any of it yet. "And the paperwork," I said, mild as milk. "The part that says you can sell it. What did you sign to list it?" A flicker between Paige and Garrett. "We used the power of attorney, Mom," Paige said. "The one you signed. The agent said it was fine." The agent. Whitney had told my daughter that a power of attorney over a person was authority to sell that person's trust property, and my daughter, who didn't know the property was in a trust, believed her because believing was convenient and checking was work. 2 people who didn't know what they didn't know, agreeing with each other. "Of course," I said. "You think of everything." And I watched her relax, watched her file me back underhandled, and that relaxation was the first thread I pulled. "When's the closing?" 2 weeks from Friday, Garrett said. "The 18th. The 18th. You can do a great deal with a date." They left at 4, certain it had gone beautifully. It had, just not for them, because they'd handed me the 3 things I most needed. The date, the instrument they thought gave them authority, and the fact that not one of them had ever pulled the deed. I had no intention of letting it reach the 18th, though. A closing table is loud and slow and public, and I am none of those things. Has anyone ever looked at the thing you built your whole life around and decided, without asking you one real question, that it was just sitting there? Tell me their first name in the comments. Only the first name. I read everyone. And subscribe because the next several minutes are the ones I built this whole story to reach. Now let me tell you how I spent the 2 weeks, because a card is no good if you play it badly, and I've spent a lifetime watching people play winning cards badly out of hurt and hurry. The first thing I did was nothing. For 1 full day, I only read. I took the trust binder from my safe deposit box, black 3 rings, my whole careful future in it, and read all 41 pages the way I'd read 10,000 files before it, looking not for what I felt but for what was true. The frightened reading was right there. My family is selling my home, my own daughter is using my power of attorney against me. Every word of that was real, but underneath was the title officer's reading, and it was simpler and colder, and it held. The seller has no authority to convey. The sale is void. Not voidable, void. It was never a sale at all. It was a wish 3 people agreed to call a contract. The instruments that mattered were the deed recorded in 2008 and a memorandum of trust recorded beside it. The public notice that says this property is held in trust, and here is the trustee. On the record for 16 years. The defect that would blow up their closing was one they'd been able to see for $5 all that time and had simply never looked at. And there was one more thing in that binder. Tucked in the back pocket, in an envelope gone soft as cloth, was a letter in Theo's hand. I had forgotten it was there. I'll tell you what it said, but I'm going to make you wait for it the way I made them wait. Because a thing held back is a thing believed, and because I could not read it twice in 1 week and stay the steady-handed woman I needed to be. On the second day, I went to see Francis Okonkwo, who never retired, and who remembered me the moment I walked in, because everyone at the courthouse remembers a closing officer who never once let a bad title through. I put the listing in front of her, banner and all. She read it once, set it down, looked at me over her glasses, and said the most satisfying professional sentence I've heard since I left the title company. Iris, they have no idea what they've done, do they? No, Francis, I said. They think it's just sitting there. She did not quite smile. Let's go through it. And we did, line by line, the way 2 careful women go through anything that matters. Francis confirmed on her letterhead what I already knew but needed certified, because I do not act on what I feel. I act on what is documented. The point the family never grasped was simple. A power of attorney over me as an individual gave Paige no authority whatsoever over property I held as trustee. Acting under that power, she could pay my electric bill. She could not touch 1 shingle of a house owned by the trust. The listing agreement she'd signed was signed by someone with no authority to sign it, a piece of paper with no force at all. So the sale is void, I said. The sale was never alive, Francis said. There's nothing to undo. There's only something to make plain. The moment the title company sees this binder, the closing dies on the table. She took off her glasses. You could let it reach the 18th, you know. Let Paige sit at that closing and find out, in a room full of strangers, that she's been selling a house she never owned. It would be devastating, and entirely her own doing. I thought about that, I said, and I had. There's a version where I say nothing, let the 18th arrive, and the whole thing collapses on her in public, a lesson taught with a hammer. But I didn't want the hammer. I spent 37 years preventing exactly that catastrophe for strangers. I had no appetite to engineer one for my own daughter. The hammer is loud, and loud is not the brand of a woman who held her tongue through 2 weeks of her own dispossession. There's a power that announces itself, and a power that simply, finally acts. And the second is the only kind I respect. I want it stopped now, I said, cleanly, before those poor Ostranders sink another dollar in, and before a wrecking crew gets within a mile of Theo's house. And I want Paige to learn it from me, once, all the way down, before anyone says they're sorry. Francis drew up 3 things: a letter certifying the trust and my authority as sole trustee, a formal revocation of the power of attorney Paige held, notarized, copied to her, effective immediately. I should have done it years ago. I did it that afternoon. and a short factual notice for Whitney's brokerage and the title company, stating that the Loon Lake property was held in the Vandermeer Family Trust, that the trustee had authorized no sale, that any contract was void for want of authority, and that the buyer's earnest money was to be preserved for their return. I read all three line by line, even the lines a careful lawyer wrote at my instruction, because Theo taught me the lines written on your behalf are the ones most likely to fool you. Clean, airtight, the kind of file I'd have approved across my own desk without a flag. And then, on the morning of the fourth day, before I sent a single one of them, I picked up the telephone and made the call I'd been moving toward for 2 weeks. And, if I'm honest, for 16 years. I called the title company handling the sale. Lakeshore Settlement Services, a young outfit, opened since I retired. I asked for the escrow officer on the Loon Lake file. A careful, harried young man came on. His name was Devon, and I told him who I was, not the seller's mother, the sole trustee and sole lifetime beneficiary of the Vandermeer Family Trust, the actual owner of record of the property his company was about to close on. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said. "I have a seller listed as Paige Dolan, acting under power of attorney for Iris Vandermeer." "You have a problem listed as that," I said gently, "because I've always believed you deliver the worst news gently. It's the only mercy left to offer. Let me save your company a great deal of trouble, Devon. I know exactly what your title search finds on the 18th. A deed recorded in November 2008 conveying that property into an irrevocable trust, and a memorandum of trust naming me, not anyone with a power of attorney, as sole trustee. A power of attorney over me personally does not reach property I hold as trustee. Your seller has no authority to convey. There is no sale. The longer your file pretends otherwise, the worse the morning gets for everyone who signed it. I'm not calling to threaten you. I'm calling to hand you the defect before it costs your buyers their down payment and your company its name. Pull the deed. Book and page are in the letter I'm couriering you within the hour. $5.04 will confirm every word. I have closed more than one matter simply by being more comfortable with silence than the person on the other end of it. I let the silence run. I heard him typing. I heard the typing stop. "There it is," I said. "Isn't it?" "There it is," he said. And then, in the voice of a young man relieved a catastrophe was caught before it happened instead of after, "Ma'am, thank you. What do you need from me?" "Confirm in writing that the transaction is terminated for defective title. Preserve the Ostrander's earnest money, every penny. They walked into something that wasn't their fault, and I won't have them out $1. Notify the brokerage, and copy me on all of it. My attorney's certification is on its way to you now." "Done," he said. "All of it. Today." That was the call. That was the moment the card came out of the black binder and onto the record, where it could not go back in. The sale wasn't contested. It wasn't in dispute. It was over, and it had never, for a single one of those 11 days, been my family's to sell. It had been mine since the 14th of November, 2008, when Theo and I did the careful thing while we were still frightened enough to be wise. The courier went out. The notices went out. The revocation went out certified, with a green card that would come back bearing Paige's signature. And then I made a cup of tea, and I waited for the phone to ring, and I did not gloat. Gloating is for people who weren't sure they'd win. Paige called at 6:50 that evening. I know, because I worked with documents for 37 years, and I write the time on everything. She wasn't talking about the lake just sitting there now. She was crying, the real kind, and under the crying was the thing I'd been waiting 2 weeks to hear surface. Fear. "Mom, what did you do?" "The title company called Whitney. They're saying I had no right. They're talking about her license. The Ostrander's lawyer left a message. Garrett is..." "Mom, what did you do?" "I stopped the sale of my house," I said. "That's all. I'd have thought you'd want to know your mother could still do a thing or two. You went behind my back." And here, where my voice should have risen, it dropped. Notice that, Because it's the whole of who I am. When the stakes go up, I go quiet. Anger makes a person bigger and easier to argue with. Quiet makes them smaller and impossible to find the edges of. No, Paige. I went in front of the deed. You went behind it. For 11 days. You put a lockbox on your father's boathouse, let a stranger walk buyers across his dock, and wrote, "Bring your builder," over a photo of the house he built you. All without once driving 40 minutes to ask me, or spending $5 to learn whether the thing you were selling was yours to sell. It wasn't. It never was. Come to my house tomorrow, both of you, and I'll show you why. The proper way, on paper. There's a part of this you need to learn from me. Once, and then it's finished. A silence, and then very small, the question I'd been waiting for. Not how could you, not we're family, she said. Whose is it then? If it isn't ours, whose is it? Come tomorrow, I said. It's the same name it's been for 16 years. You just never went to look. They came at 2 the next afternoon. No coffee cake this time. I'd asked Francis to be there, with the binder, and I'd asked Hank to drive down from the lake. He sat by the window in his good shirt with a manila folder of his own, the dates and the plate numbers and the architect, with the plans. Because a thing witnessed is a thing that holds, and I was not going to have this be my word against theirs ever again. Paige's eyes were swollen. Garrett looked like a man who'd spent the night learning the exact dimensions of a hole he'd dug. I made tea and poured it for everyone, including them, and Garrett didn't touch his, and that untouched cup was, in its way, the most honest thing he did all summer. I did not raise my voice once. The whole thing was conducted at the volume of a woman offering tea, which I had, in fact, just done. I opened the binder and laid the documents out one at a time, in order, the way a banker counts out gold, not all at once on the floor, but coin by coin, so you have to watch each one land. The recorded deed. November 2008. Your father and I conveyed the lake house into a trust. From that day, we did not own it as people. The trust owned it. You were 27. We told you. You had a date that night. The memorandum of trust. Recorded the same day. Public. It names the trustee. Anyone could have pulled it for $5. Your agent should have. You should have. The buyer's title company would have on the 18th, and the whole thing would have come apart in a room full of strangers instead of at my table. I spared you that. It's the last thing I get to spare you in this. The trust itself, open to the page, my finger resting on it. Sole trustee, me. Sole lifetime beneficiary, me. The right to live in that house until I die and the express prohibition against anyone selling it out from under that right. You two and Daniel, remainder beneficiaries. You receive it when I'm gone, not 1 hour before, and you can do nothing with it while I live. You had no more authority to sell that house than the mailman did. The revoked power of attorney. And this, you believed it let you act for me in everything. It let you pay my phone bill. It never reached the trust, because the trust isn't me. It's a separate thing, with its own owner, and its owner never authorized one word of what you did. I revoked it yesterday. Paige was crying without sound now. Garrett was very still. The sale is void, I said. Not undone. Void. It was never real. The title company has terminated it. The Ostranders get their $31,000 back, every cent. Because they're decent people who got hurt by this, and I won't have them pay for it. What I can't fix is the rest. And understand, I'm not the one who broke it. Whitney sold a property her seller didn't own. That's a problem for her, her brokerage, and the board that licensed her 8 months ago, and there's nothing I can do about it now, because she put it in writing, and writing doesn't unwrite itself. You signed a listing agreement under an authority you didn't have. That's yours too. I didn't make these problems. You made them in the 11 days you spent so sure I was too old and too sad to notice. I'm only the person who finally pulled the page you all refused to read. That is the reckoning. I want to be precise about it, because I told you at the start it would be quiet and surgical and irreversible, and it was all 3. No shouting. A phone call to a title company, a courier, 3 letters, A revoked signature. The card fired once. It fired on the record. And it could not go back in because recorded things do not unrecord themselves, no matter how carelessly anyone loved you. Garrett tried once to turn it back into a feeling instead of a fact. He spread his big hands on my table. Iris, come on. We don't need lawyers and revocations and a neighbor taking notes. This is family. We can work this out between us. I slid the recorded deed an inch toward him, the one with the date on it. Garrett, we're using lawyers and witnesses precisely because it's family. A stranger I'd have let walk into that closing and learn it from a title search. I drove 40 minutes and pulled a binder for, so you'd learn it gently, at my table, over tea you didn't drink. But it's going to be on paper, all the way through, because for 16 years this family ran on what people felt instead of what was written, and look where the feelings got us. 11 days, a lockbox on Theo's boathouse, a bulldozer 3 days out. We're done running on feelings. He had nothing to say to that. You cannot argue with a fact the way you can argue with an angry woman. That is why I was never, ever going to be the angry woman. And then I did the last thing, the only part that wasn't about paper. I took out Theo's letter. I'd read it once, alone, the night I found it, and hadn't been able to read it twice until that moment. I unfolded it, turned it so Paige could see her father's careful slanted print, and read it aloud, because I wanted his voice in the room and not just mine. He'd written it in 2008, the day we signed. It said, "To whoever someday wants to sell this house, and someone will." I built it with my hands so Iris would always have one place no one could take from her, no matter what happens to me, no matter what happens to the money, no matter who decides they know better. I have watched her spend her whole life, making sure other families never lost their homes. This is me making sure she never loses hers. If you are reading this because you tried to sell the lake out from under her, then the trust did exactly what we built it to do. And I am sorry you had to learn it this way, and I am not sorry it worked. Take care of your mother. The house was always for her. Theo. I folded it back up. Paige made a sound I have not heard from my daughter since she was a girl, and she put her head down on the table, on the spot where she once did her algebra, and said into the wood, "We never pulled the deed." "No," I said, "you didn't. Dad set it up so we couldn't." She lifted her head, her face wrecked. And here is the thing nobody tells you about the moment the card lands all the way down. Even when it's total, it does not feel like victory. He knew we'd try. He knew somebody would, I said. He didn't know it would be you. I don't think he'd have believed it was you. But he built it so it wouldn't matter who it was. That's what careful is, Paige. Careful isn't fear. Careful is making sure that on the worst day, the one you can't see coming, the people you love are standing on something that holds. You spent 2 years deciding I couldn't keep up. Your father spent one afternoon in 2008 making sure I'd never have to ask your permission to keep my own home. One of those things turned out to be true. Garrett left to make his phone's calls. Francis closed the binder. Hank quietly slid his folder of dates across the table to me, in case I ever needed it. I didn't, and I keep it still. And Paige sat a while longer with her father's letter in her hands, and I let her, and I did not soften it for her, because I'd softened things for that girl her whole life, and look where it had gotten us both. Now, I told you I wouldn't give you a tidy reconciliation, and I won't, because the card had to fire first, and it did on a Tuesday afternoon, irreversibly, before anyone said sorry. I'm proud of that, and I want you to hear why. You do not wait for the apology to protect yourself. The apology, if it comes after you're safe, or it does not come at all. A woman who makes herself safe first is not bitter. She is solvent. I made myself solvent with one phone call. Everything after that was extra. What came after was complicated, the way real things are. Whitney's brokerage had a very bad month, and I'm told she's no longer in real estate, which I carry more easily than I expected, because a person who tells a grieving widow's daughter that a power of attorney lets her sell a house she's never checked the title on has chosen the wrong profession. The Ostranders got their earnest money back within the week. Garrett's dealership was as bad as I'd feared, the real engine of all of it a balloon payment he couldn't make, and in time, on my terms, through a door I opened because it was mine to open, I helped my daughter. Not him. Her. That was the whole point. That it was mine to give and not theirs to take. I'm still at the lake. I'll die at the lake, in my own time, in the front room where Theo died. With the morning light coming through the window he cut on my side of the bed, in a house no one will ever again call, just sitting there. The lockbox is in a drawer in the boathouse. I kept it. I don't entirely know why. Maybe to remember how it starts. Quietly, with a red banner on a photograph, while everyone who put it there is certain they already know exactly what your life is worth. About a year on, Paige came up to the lake. She sat on the dock with me, where her father taught her to cast, quiet a long while, and then she said, I keep thinking about it's just sitting there. I say it to myself sometimes. I can't believe I said it to you. I didn't help her across it. I have learned not to help people across the hard part. The crossing is the point. It wasn't sitting there, I said. It was holding still. There's a difference, and you spent 2 years not seeing it. A thing that holds still under you isn't doing nothing. It's the floor. Your father built me a floor and put it past the reach of everyone who'd ever be sure they knew better, and then he wrote down why, and I kept the page, and the page held. That's all I ever did, Paige. I kept the page. She cried then. I did not. After a while I made tea, the way I would for anyone, and we drank it on the dock, and it was not fixed, and I'm not certain it gets fixed. Some debts are paid in full, since are only ever serviced, month over month, and I've made my peace with not knowing which kind this one is. What I won't do is pretend it's settled to spare either of us the weight of it still being owed. So here is what I want to leave you with, because I didn't make this to tell you a story about me. I made it for you. When someone tells you the thing you built is just sitting there, your house, your savings, your patience, your whole quiet life, hear it clearly. Because they've just told you they've stopped seeing it as yours. That's the warning. Not the insult. The warning. And you're allowed to answer it the quiet way. You do not owe anyone your panic, or a scene, or the satisfaction of watching you come apart. You're allowed to keep your own keys, your own papers, and the one recorded page that says, past all argument, that the floor under your life is yours. Keep the page. Record the page. And on the day someone decides they know better than the document, let the document speak. It speaks more clearly than you ever could. It cannot be argued with, and it does not raise its voice. The difference between sure and right, I learned across 37 years and one black binder, lives in exactly one place. Not the heart, not the family, not the way a thing has always felt. It lives at the county, in a book, on a page, with a stamp and a date. Mine said November 14th, 2008. Theirs said nothing at all, because they never once went to look. I'm Iris Vandermeer. I read land for 37 years, and I married a man who built a house so well no one could ever take it from me, and between his hands and my paperwork, they never had a chance. If someone in your life ever looked at the thing you poured your whole self into and called it just sitting there, tell me their first name below, and tell me, were they right, or did they just never check? Subscribe, and stay with me, and I'll tell you another. There is always a trust, there is always a deed, there is always a page nobody bothered to pull. The house is whoever's name is on it. It always was.